Dongshan Liangjie. The case. The 38th patriarch was Great Master Dongshan Wuben, or Dongshan Liangjie. He visited Yunyan, that's his teacher, and asked, "Who can hear the non-sentient preach the Dharma?" Yunyan answered, "The non-sentient can hear the non-sentient preach the Dharma." The master asked, "Do you hear it?" Yunyan replied, "If I could hear it, you would not be able to hear me preach the Dharma." The master said, "In that case, Liangjie does not hear you preach the Dharma." Yunyan said, "If you still don't hear me preach the Dharma, how much less can you hear the non-sentient preach the Dharma?" The master was greatly awakened at this point, and he spoke this verse. "Wonderful, wonderful. The preaching of the Dharma by the non-sentient is inconceivable. If you try to hear with your ears, it is hard to understand. When you listen with your mind's eye, then you know it." Yunyan approved. Good evening, all you beginners' minds out there, you bodhisattvas, you Buddhas, and as I like to say, you future corpses, which kind of keeps that in front. And you know, in our practice, we're always talking about impermanence. I don't use that line a lot with my hospice patients, though, because they're a little close. We have a tradition where we remember our indigenous peoples, and I would like to acknowledge and pay deep respect to the Gabrielino Tongva people here in Los Angeles, and to the Northern Chumash tribe. They're called Yaqui Tutu Yaktahini, and that's up in San Luis Obispo, where I live and where Eduardo lives. So let's give acknowledgement to the indigenous people wherever you live. And I don't know where everybody is on Zoom, but I'm sure you're spread out. I acknowledge and offer deep gratitude to the indigenous land and water that supports us as we're gathered right here, right now. And I invite you to join me in that acknowledgement, that respect, and that gratitude. As I mentioned in a recent Dharma talk in San Luis Obispo, Yak Tutu, from their Northern Chumash name, means the dance of life. I think that's beautiful. And in our area, the Northern Chumash are now trying to buy back some of their ancestral land. In the 1700s, the land was 12,000 acres was taken from them without agreement or any compensation. And now they're trying to buy back 9,000 acres of that pristine land. Well, it's kind of ironic, huh? You steal something from me and now I have to buy it back from you. Here at ZCLA, we're about to begin a training in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. DEIB. We need to do that. We have a long way to go still. But it's a worthy endeavor. I'd also like to acknowledge that it is Black History Month, the month of February. This annual celebration of achievements by African Americans and a time for recognizing their central role in the U.S. history, in our U.S. history. Knowing full well that they made these myriad achievements in the throes of slavery and the Jim Crow world. We must do better. Roshi Bernie Glassman's Dharma heirs put together a collection of koans, and there were really stories of their experiences with Roshi Bernie. And one of them tells about Father Robert Kennedy. He's a Catholic priest. And Roshi Bernie wants to empower him as a Zen teacher. Well, in the little community that I think it was in New York at the time, in that little community, they were pretty upset. What do you mean? A Catholic priest going to be a Zen teacher? Bernie's reply was, are we inclusive or not? First full day of Beginner's Mind Sesshin 2024. How are you doing? I absolutely love, I think this is my favorite Sesshin. I like them all, but this is particularly sweet because normally we do have this blend of the more experienced practitioners with the less experienced practitioners, some totally new to this. And I can only imagine what you're thinking. Thrown into these positions, making mistake after mistake. I think...
He's laughing with you, not at you.
that Sensei Dharma Joy remembers this story, but my very first sesshin here, during the council afterwards, that was my very first time, and it was, I think it was a Rohatsu sesshin. So it was a long, long sesshin. And I just said, this reminds me of my first marriage. I'm told to shut up and only talk to when I do something wrong. So they say, Dogen Zenji said that a Zen master's life is one continuous mistake. And I don't know if historians really think that he really said that. But Okamura Roshi thinks that maybe this was a paraphrase from one of the fascicles in the Shobogenzo. But James Ford, many of you may know him, he has a blog, Monkey Mind. And James Ford's actually been here before and spoken to us. And he says that in all likelihood, the source of that phrase, that the Zen master's life is one continuous mistake, comes from Zen master Shunryu Suzuki, who Sensei Dharma Joy talked about in his opening remarks. It's in the book Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And Suzuki Roshi said, when we reflect on what we are doing in our everyday life, we are always ashamed of ourselves. One of my students wrote to me saying, you sent me a calendar and I'm trying to follow the good mottos which appear on every page. But the year has hardly begun and I have already failed. Suzuki goes on to say that Dogen Zenji said, Shoshaku Jushaku. Shaku generally means mistake or wrong. Shoshaku Jushaku means to succeed wrong with wrong or one continuous mistake. According to Dogen, one continuous mistake can also be called Zen. A Zen master's life could be said to be so many years of Shoshaku Jushaku. This means so many years of one single-minded effort. Busy week. with Sesshin. Next week we have a Hosen up in San Luis Obispo for Gary Koshin. It's Koshin's Hosen. Gary Koshin West, and some of you will be up there joining us. And I think many others will be watching on Zoom. Looking forward to hosting that. So it's a challenge sometimes, huh? How about oryoki? I haven't done oryoki in a long time. I called it oive-oki. And I definitely felt like a beginner today, but fortunately I had Sensei Dharma Joy by my side. But just keep going. And I ask you, what brought you to Sesshin? What brought you to Great Dragon Mountain for this weekend? Deborah Fukuan West from our group in San Luis Obispo takes over sometimes for me when I'm gone and does the MailChimp posts, our little advertising that we just show our offerings. And I saw her post from last night, the Thursday night, for our Thursday night meeting, and I wanted to share it with you. I think that at the bottomless bottom, there is a longing to know something, to fulfill something, to live differently, to make sense of our lives, to understand what we're doing on the earth. The world needs these places where people penetrate into and live out the wholesomeness of life. The whole of life, nothing excluded. Knowing oneself as the intersection of all. We need places where people are examining this, where they're willing to spend time experiencing and being a voice for this kind of stillness in the midst of life. Zen Center of Los Angeles is such a place. And that's what we're doing right now. And those words were from Roshi Wendy Hegyoku Nakao, my teacher and the teacher of many of us in this room. So what is your existential question or questions that you're bringing to Sesshin, that you're sitting with? Tonight I want to introduce you to Dongshan, Master Dongshan. He's well known to, I think, a number of people here in this Zendo, but to many of you, you probably have never heard his name. I was supposed to do a talk on Master Dongshan for Ruatsu Sesshin. Was all set to go, and then I had a family emergency, a daughter in the hospital, and couldn't make it. But it spurred on this study. And Sensei Dharma Joy is rolling his eyes. I always go overboard with this stuff. But the reality is now I have enough material to work for 4 or 5 classes, which I'm planning on doing now. So tonight's just going to be more of an overview of Master Dongshan. And I've used a lot of resources. Andy Ferguson's Zen Chinese Heritage, William Powell, the record of Tung Song. Norman Fisher has many talks on him. I think I listened to 4 or 6 of his talks. And then Just This Is It by Daniel Lighton. And I think I'm going to use that as the text for the classes. And you know, we did this study out of the Denkoroku, which is where this case came from, back in 2009. We also did some talks on Ruwatsu Sesshin from that book. But it was back in 2009, and my book, I had written in the date and who the speaker was. And it was wonderful. Roshi Ryodo, Roshi Kodo, Sensei Shingetsu, Sensei Daishin, and Sensei Ensho. And three of them they're now teaching in another realm, no longer with us. But Dongshan, Master Dongshan, really plays a prominent role in our tradition, in our lineage. And he was a Chinese Buddhist monk, lived during the Tang dynasty. And that Tang dynasty, you'll probably just glaze over with numbers, but it's 618 to 907. And it's important in that he founded the Stao Dong school. Did I get that right? Reverend Jitsujo is helping me with my Chinese pronunciation, so I had to, hopefully I got it right. You said put a T in there. I did, Stao. So this Stao Dong school became one of the 5 houses of Zen in China. And this was considered the golden age of Zen. It was also considered, this Tang dynasty, the golden age in China. And these schools, they had, back then, there were distinct leaders with different personalities, so they all had a little bit of different slant on Zen. And interestingly, 4 of those, they were all in the same basic geographic area, except Liangjie school wasn't close to them. And this school is important to us because this was later transmitted to Japan in the 13th century by Master Dogen, who was the founder of the Soto school, I'd say co-founder of the Soto school in Japan. And that is one of the main streams that flow through the Zen Center of Los Angeles, is the Soto tradition. Master Dongshan is also said to have written the Song of the Jewel Mirror Awareness. That's what we sang this morning. It's one of my favorites. Now, modern scholars actually kind of think that maybe he didn't really write it because it wasn't in written form until hundreds of years after he died. But Taigen Dan Lighten says, you know, it was an oral tradition back then anyway. It's kind of something that could be easily memorized. And so maybe it was just passed on orally and then finally written down. We don't know. And finally, he's also known for creating the 5 ranks, verses of the 5 ranks. And that's something that we study usually toward the end of our official training. It's beautiful. It's dealing with the absolute and relative realities. And maybe it sounds a little esoteric. It's the absolute within the relative within the absolute, the coming from within the absolute, the contrasted relative alone, and then unity attained, where the opposite states become one. So for each of these ranks, Dongshan writes a verse, and it says, trying to bring such abstract ideals into the realm of real experience. He used metaphors of day-to-day occurrences that his students could understand. And so here's one. Who can be tuned to that beyond what is and what is not? though all people want to leave the ever-flowing river, each is still in darkness, black as charcoal. I don't know if that makes anything clear or not. And it's interesting, with all the studies I've read, a lot of the teachers, such as Dogen Zenji, they don't hold the 5 ranks in high favor, which I found really interesting. That said, Dogen Zenji praises Dongshan all the time, thinks very, very highly of him. But apparently the 5 ranks were too much of a scheduled path, and they're more into the pathless path. They don't want stages mapped out. So when he was still a young monk, he read the Heart Sutra with a teacher. And we will chant that Heart Sutra tomorrow morning. So he comes to that part where it says, there is no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. And he touches his face. And he says, well, wait a minute. I've got an eye, nose, a tongue, a body, a mind. Why does the scripture say that they do not exist? And perhaps the first time you saw this, you may have had the same feeling. Well, the teacher was so impressed that he said, I can't be your teacher. And he sends him off to another teacher. There's a great little book. It's called Zen Buddhism. For You, A Little Enlightenment by David Batter. And in one of those, I always get a chuckle out of it. It says, if there is no self, then whose arthritis is this? So the koan that I opened with speaks to sentient beings and non-sentient beings. And Dongshan's questioning whether non-sentient beings could expound the Dharma. And it's an interesting koan, and it's an interesting thought. And as we explore that, we can look at the Atamsaka Sutra, the Flower Ornament Sutra, which says the earth expounds Dharma. Living beings expound it. Throughout the 3 times, everything expounds it. And before Donshan, years before, there was another great teacher, Jonran, and he spoke of the teaching potential of grasses and leaves, grasses and trees. You know, and I remember in a meeting, maybe it was a priest meeting with Roshi, and we were talking about Dharma gates and how Dharma gates are everywhere. And I think that's very true. And given causes and conditions, everything can serve as a Dharma gate. Everything. Sentient, non-sentient alike. And this koan I really liked in that it kind of connects to our environmental crisis today, or how we look at the world. And you know, the indigenous people, they see the whole world as alive, sentient and non-sentient. Even that it has consciousness. Dan Lighton notes that the Native American Cheyenne believe that rocks have consciousness. I feel that's so. I've been so struck driving down here. I try to go, my favorite route is coming through Koyama Valley. and just, it seems like the rocks, the gravel on the side of the highway. It just seems they have consciousness. Then in this story, Dongshan's teacher, Yunyan, are really related to him. He's not very well known at all. Lighten has a section that says, Yunyan, a Chan failure. And Chan is Chinese for Zen, a Zen failure. Have you ever felt that way? I have. So there's all these interesting stories with Yunyan, and a lot of them include Daowu, his brother, and it's biological brother, and it's older biological brother and a Dharma brother. So they both studied together with different teachers at different times, and these were really, really, really well-known teachers of their time. But poor Yunyan is seen as a complete failure. He was supposedly Bai Yang's attendant, personal attendant, for 20 years without understanding the Dharma. Now, that said, is Ananda was Buddha's attendant, and he didn't have his full awakening till after the Buddha died. And can you imagine that? He was attending him, he was close, he was with him every day, day in and day out, and with the Buddha. And he doesn't have his awakening till he's passed. Now, this teacher that he was with, Baijang, is famous for his day without work is a day without food. Many of you will remember him. And he was also working with the man who had been a fox for 500 years until Baijang saved him. Yunyan studies with another teacher. And the teacher asks him, what do you do about the birth and death right in front of you? Yunyan responds, there is no birth and death in front of me. His teacher responds, you were with Baijang for 20 years and you still have not gotten rid of your commonness. Poor guy. His brother that I mentioned earlier one time was standing outside the abbot's room and he could overhear what was going on. And I guess he was so mortified with the exchange that he unconsciously bit his finger so hard it bled. So, as I said, I relate to this. I worked with the Koan Mu for, I think it was 8 years. I thought I had the record here at ZCLA, but I was at a Sesshin one time and Roshi Ryodo was in the back where Gikai is, in the monitor spot. And he said, 11 years for me. A long time. Hopefully you feel good about reading the Fukan Zazenge today, right? Where Dogen Zenji says, therefore it does not matter whether one is very smart or very stupid. There is no distinction between those of sharp and dull faculties. I think it's faculties. Dongshan has another exchange when he was departing from his teacher Yunyan. And that's who we began the first koan with. And as he's leaving, Dongshan asks Yunyan, later on, if I am asked to describe your reality or teaching, how should I respond? After some pause, Yunyan said, Just this is it. Just this is it. So the narration states that Dongshan was kind of lost in thought. And then Union said, "You are now in charge of this great matter. You must be most thoroughgoing." And Donshan leaves. Later, and this is a very famous story as well, later while he's wading across a stream, he looks down into the stream, saw his reflection, and, as it says, awakened to the meaning of the previous exchange. And then he wrote a very famous verse, "Just don't seek from others, or you'll be far estranged from self. I now go on alone. Everywhere I meet it. It now is me. I now am not it. One must understand in this way to merge with suchness." Andy Ferguson's translation, "Avoid seeking elsewhere, for that's far from the self. Now I travel alone. Everywhere I meet it. Now it's exactly me. Now I'm not it. It must thus be understood to merge with thusness. It now is me. I am not it." So what's this it? This it of just this. This it of just this is totally inclusive, incorporating everything. It's the intersection of the relative and the absolute, the phenomenal with the intrinsic. Many of us studying koans are familiar with Harada Roshi's fraction, where he speaks to the numerator and denominator, the numerator being the phenomenal world, the denominator being the absolute. And to communicate, we speak about each one or the other. But his point that he always says is it's the whole fraction. Song of the Jewel Mirror Awareness, which again we chanted this morning, said to have been written by Dongshan. And I'll tell you, it's one of the highlights of my training with Roshi Yogyoku was when we did a study of both the identity of relative and absolute and the Song of the Jewel Mirror Awareness. One-on-one. The Dharma of suchness is intimately transmitted by Buddhas and ancestors. Now you have it. Preserve it well. Those are the beginning lines of the Song of the Jewel Mirror Awareness. Now you have it. Preserve it well. You already have it. Do you believe that? Do you know that to be true? I love that writing behind the Bodhi tree on the shed as you walk down the driveway. All beings without exception awake. And of course, in the Song of the Jewel Mirror Awareness, the line switches to you are not it, but in truth, it is you. So Dongshan speaking to us. First was a self-reflection, but now he's telling each one of us. And these lines, like the first two lines, refer to this occasion of Dongshan's parting from Yunyan and his looking into his reflection in the stream. And the stream, or the reflecting surface, is described as a jewel mirror, which is part of the title. Well, I'm going to end with his passing. It's because Ernest Hemingway always said, all real stories end in death. And it's an interesting exchange. He knows that he's going to pass. And the monks are freaked out. And this is also a koan, so there's a little exchange. A monk asked, when the master is not well, is there someone who is well or not? Dongshan said, there is. The monk asked, can the one who's not ill still see the master or not? Dongshan said, I can still see him. The monk asked, what does the master see? Dongshan said, when I observe him, I don't see any illness. Dongshan then said to the monks, when you leave the skin bag you inhabit, where will you go and see me again? The monks didn't answer. So he wrote a verse, which is kind of his death poem, I would guess. He said, students as numerous as sands on the Ganges, but none are awakened. They err by searching for the path in another person's mouth. If you wish to forget form and not leave any traces, wholeheartedly strive to walk in emptiness. So the story goes that Dongshan had his attendants shave his head, bathe, get dressed, had the bell rung to summon the monks so that he could bid them farewell. He appeared to have passed away, and the monks wept piteously. Suddenly, he's not dead. And he said to them, homeless monks aren't attached to things. That is their authentic practice. Why lament an arduous life and pitiful death? So he instructs the director of the temple to do what he called a delusion banquet. So they did this banquet in adoration for Dongshan. So 7 days later, the food was prepared. Dongshan had a final meal with his Sangha. He said, don't make a big deal about it. When I pass away, don't go carrying on about it. Then it said he returned to his room, sitting upright, and passed away. So please let the schedule hold you, mistakes and all. Keep your samadhi. Just this is it. You are not it, but in truth, it is you. Numberless beings, I vow to serve them. Inexhaustible delusions, I vow to end them. Boundless dharmas, I vow to practice them. Unsurpassable Buddha way, I vow to embody it. Numberless beings, I vow to serve them. Inexhaustible delusions, I vow to end them. Boundless dharmas, I vow to practice them. Unsurpassable